The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to be getting started in a couple of minutes. We just want to give everyone a chance to ensure that their webinar software is working properly on their computer, and other folks a chance to join us before 10 a.m. So I will be back with you at 10 a.m. to get the webinar started. Okay, good morning again, everyone. My name is Alex Bougea. I'm the Safety and Legislation Consultant with School Bus Ontario. We're going to go ahead and get the webinar started now, so welcome, everyone. We currently have 126 participants logged into the webinar, so I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to join us this morning. I just want to go through a couple quick comments and reminders before we get started. First off, just our apologies on the last-minute date change. It was done to try and ensure we had the opportunity to get you as much up-to-date information on this topic as possible. So our apologies again for that last-minute date change. Second, in respect to questions that may come up during the webinar, we're going to hold the question and answer period of this event at the end of the webinar. So if you do have questions that come to mind as we're going through the webinar, please type them in the question box on your screen, and we'll be sure to address them at the end. This is done just to try and keep the flow of the webinar going. And if at the end we don't have time to address all the questions, we'll be sure to follow up with the individuals directly afterwards. Also, our contact information will be displayed, so if you do have questions we didn't address, you can feel free to email us directly. For those of you who are note takers out there, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be emailed to all webinar attendees after the webinar. And we're going to be distributing an electronic survey to all of you. So we'd really appreciate your feedbacks and comments on this webinar. So with that, I'd like to just quickly introduce myself, as there's a couple of participants who may not have worked with me yet in my role as safety and legislation consultant. So my background is I spent about 15 years with the Ministry of Transportation in the carrier enforcement program. About half of that time was spent as an on-road officer in the Windsor and London area. About 3 years was spent as an auditor in the Waterloo area. And then the last part of my career was spent in the head office in St. Catharines with the carrier safety enforcement branch. During my time in St. Catharines, I oversaw the MTO enforcement officer training program, as well as had the opportunity to administer the provincial carrier audit program. I do have a background in training. When I was with MTO, I was certified as a Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance instructor and had the opportunity to instruct on both driver and vehicle regulations, school bus inspections, and a number of MTO basic training subjects which were given to new recruits when they came into the ministry. So that's enough about me, Alex Bougea. I'm going to turn it over to the other half of the safety and legislation team, Robert, just to give a quick introduction of his background. So go ahead, Robert.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Robert Monster. I've been now with the safety and legislation team since my retirement from MTO in 2018. My focus is on vehicle issues for the association. My background is that I was with 31 years with the Ministry of Transportation, working as in the last number of years as the vehicle standards engineer. And I was responsible for the development of vehicle standards, manufacturing standards, as well as inspection standards. So I would have been involved in the heavy-duty inspection standards in National Safety Code 11B, used for the annual and semi-annual inspections, as well as the development of the D250 standard. I've been a member of the D250 committee since 1998, 4 years as vice chair, or no, chair of the committee, and now vice chair of the committee, and working on an ongoing basis with that. So that is my background from, there's my background. Anyways, back to you, Alex.
Thanks very much, Robert. So I'm just going to take us quickly through the topics we're going to be discussing today. We do have a lot to cover. I'm going to do my best to get it done in the 45 minutes allotted, but we may end up running a bit long. We had a lot of new information come out yesterday in respects to the drive test reopening program that I'm going to discuss with you. So like I said, I'll do my best to get through all this. So I'm going to start out with going over the MTO licensing extensions for the various products related to the COVID-19 state of emergency and discussing how those work. I'll take you through the drive test centers reopening on June 22nd and some of the protocols that are going to be in place around that process. And then the last number of subjects are going to be around processes and tips to try and help our members avoid delays when having these various licensing components processed by the ministry. For those of you who have participated in our webinars before, a lot of this is a review from our webinar we did late last year. That being said, I will be touching on a few key items in each area that relate to some of the changes and processes that we're dealing with around the COVID-19 state of emergency. And at the end of the webinar, I will be, like I said, doing the questions and answers. So with that, our first topic is licensing extensions. So the Ministry of Transportation announced earlier this year that in response to the state of emergency, they were enacting an extension to various licensing products. So basically the way this works is it applies to driver's licenses, both permanent and temporary licenses, vehicle plates, annual inspection stickers, and CVR certificates. There's a number of other products that were also extended, but those are the key ones that apply to us. So a couple of things I just want everyone to keep in mind in terms of how this extension works. Essentially, if the product, so if it's a driver's license or a license plate, has an expiry date that was on March 1st, 2020 or later, that product continues to be valid today. So the examples I would give are, you have a driver who has a Class B license. That license expired on March 3rd, 2020. As it stands today, that driver's license is still valid. Another good example would be you've been in the process of upgrading a driver and you had them complete all their testing and they were issued a temporary driver's license. That temporary driver's license with a Class B or E was expiring after March 1st, but you haven't had a chance to get that driver into an SBDIC course to give them their full license. That temporary license is still valid today, regardless of whether it's expired, as long as it expired after March 1st. A big topic that's coming up right now, as well as with school bus license plates. So I realize with the traditional school year ending in June, most school buses will only be licensed through to the end of June. This temporary extension continues to apply to plates as well. So school buses will continue to be validated as they would be through the school year past the end of June. This applies regardless of whether you usually apply the restricted use only sticker or whether you used to run charters. The biggest way I tend to explain this is you have to think of it as if every day from now on is February 29th. So if the document you're looking at or the product you're looking at was valid on February 29th, then you continue to consider it valid today. One thing I did want to highlight on the annual inspection stickers, annual inspections are extended, but that does not absolve the responsibility of the vehicle owner and operator to ensure that the vehicle is in good working condition. So you do have to ensure that the vehicle is maintained and is safe to operate for the road, even though you may be able to run with an expired annual. So a couple key components for this at this point. No expiry date has been set for the extension. So the extension is indefinite right now. If any of you saw the news release that came out yesterday in regards to the drive test centers reopening, Minister Mulrooney, the Minister of Transportation, made some very emphatic statements about products being extended and that no one would lose their license because of the COVID-19 state of emergency. So I know a lot of people are concerned about when this extension will end. The government is committed to keeping this in place until things return to, the term new normal, and the backlog has cleared. These extensions were actually enacted through regulation, so these are actually in law. They're not something that's done by policy, but the actual Highway Traffic Act was amended. Now, some things that have been cropping up that people need to be aware of is while the government enacted these extensions, they didn't have time or the ability to go in and change the computer programs that run in the background. So what that means is the computer system that deals with licensing is still operating under the normal premise that people are expiring, and this may lead to confusion. So you will have drivers who will continue to receive renewal notices despite the fact that their license is extended. The other big one that happens is the SBDIC situation I mentioned earlier, where you have a driver who has a valid or a temporary driver's license, Class B driver's license that expired after March 1st. They haven't taken their SBDIC. A lot of these drivers will receive a Class C license in the mail. Don't worry about it. That Class B temporary is still valid. So they can continue to operate a school bus because that Class B temporary is extended beyond its expiry date. The other place you're going to run into confusion is around driver's abstract or driver checks. So you may run a driver's abstract and it'll show that the driver's license is expired or invalid or downgraded. Same thing with the driver check service. It'll show a disconnect. As long as that physical document in front of you is expired after March 1st, then it is still valid. Medicals are a little bit different. For medical renewals, any medical which was due after March 1st is on a rolling 60-day renewal. So the medicals will have their due dates extended in 60-day intervals. And the computer system, I'm told, has been upgraded. So a driver should not be downgraded for failing to file a medical. If a driver is downgraded, you're going to want to have that driver contact medical review, or you can reach out to me to assist you and figure out why the driver got downgraded, because that should not have happened at this point. A couple other important factors to remember with regards to licensing. It only applies to existing documents. So this is not something that you can use for new documents. The example I use is if you bought a new bus, you can't simply, for example, take the plate off of your old bus that you sold and put it on the new bus and consider it valid. It basically only applies to the existing documents, registrations, etc., as you have had on February 29th. Drivers who are going to be traveling outside the province, there is a valid temporary validation extension letter that's available. The website is here. This letter is updated every month, typically around the 15th of the month, so they can go on and get a new copy of this letter. And it's just something that they can carry with them to show that the license is valid. So right now, the letter that's out there expires on August 1st. Don't worry about that. That doesn't mean the extension is going to expire on August 1st. It's just they don't want these letters floating out there with no due date, so to speak. If you want the official information on the extension, it's available on the site here, and that'll give you an outline exactly of what's extended in terms of the various licensing products. A couple of course, I clicked the link, so you'll have to bear with me while we get back to my webinar. Couple of reminders for those of you who are operating under the DCP program. So those of you who have signing authorities, the signing authority certification is extended or can be extended on a case-by-case basis. So if you do have signing authorities who are up for renewal and they need to have their authorities extended, you can do that by emailing a request to the driver certification program at the email address below. I'm going to do my best to not click the links that are in my presentation as I move through this. Secondary piece, for those of you who also participate in DCP, MTO continues to allow a temporary measure where you can provide your in-classroom training through virtual sessions. You do need to submit a request and fill out a bunch of information if you are going to do that. And you need to get an application form from MTO at the email address that's on the slide. And that'll basically allow you to potentially run some of your DCP training through platforms such as Skype, Zoom, or GoToWebinar like we are right now. So that's it in terms of the driver extensions. I am going to move into drive test centers reopening at this point. So as we've communicated to everyone, the drive test centers are scheduled to reopen on June 22nd. The services are going to resume at the centers over 3 phases. So it's going to be a phased-in resumption of service with a goal of having full service resumption in the fall. Travel points are not scheduled to open during phase 1, which is the June 22nd dates, but some of the travel points will begin opening later in the summer with the travel points opening in the fall. So what is happening as of Monday? So a little bit of good news here in terms of us dealing with commercial drivers for the phase 1 reopening. So the services that are going to be offered, they are going to be offering new application and knowledge tests for Class G and M licenses. So those are individuals who are coming in to get their license for the first time. The centers will be open for that service and offering the knowledge test for that, but there are going to be no road tests for the general public under phase 1. So people will not be able to take their Class G or M road tests at this time. The centers will be open to provide license exchanges, but they are going to be open to provide full service commercial driver upgrades and renewals. So part of the hope here is that because you're not going to have as much of the general public attending the centers to attend road tests, the wait times ideally a little bit lessened for the commercial drivers who need to get in there and do upgrades and renewals. CVOR written tests for new CVOR applications, and then commercial class road tests, including school bus road tests, are going to be available at 28 drive test centers at this time. So the centers that are going to be offering the road tests are listed on the screen here. The other centers, just to be clear, they are still open. They just will not be offering road tests. They're going to be only processing the inside office products as you see listed here. The phase 2 of the reopening plan is scheduled to happen August 4th. So at that point, they will start allowing G2 exit tests. So those are individuals who are trying to get their full G-class license in addition to the commercial road tests. All motorcycle road tests will resume, and then you will be able to take a commercial class road test at all the remaining drive test centers across the province. So they'll expand it out to all 50 drive test centers doing the commercial road tests. Some of the travel points will be reopening. And then the goal is on September 8th that there will be a full resumption of all services and all travel points will be operational at that point. So that's the 3 phases. The other piece to keep in mind is they are going to be restricting the services at the drive test center based on birth month to limit crowding at the centers. So for most of the centers, the driver will only be able to attend on alternating weeks, regardless of what it is they're looking to do, based on their birth month. So fairly self-explanatory, driver born in January will be able to attend a drive test center in week 1, 3, and 5. This alternating week cycle is going to continue for the foreseeable future until volumes subside. That being said, like I said, this is applying at most drive test centers. It will not be applying, the alternating access restriction will not be applying at the drive test centers you see listed on the screen. So for those centers, a driver will be able to attend at any time. Just keep in mind, those other centers are still following that 3 phase-in plan that we outlined on the previous slide. So what's a drive test center applicant or attendee going to expect? So first things they need to be aware of is they will be required to wear a mask and observe physical distancing rules when they attend the center. The mask needs to be supplied by the applicant. They are going to get asked a number of health screening questions. So basic health screening questions are going to be around, did they have any symptoms within the last 14 days? Excuse me. And have they traveled outside Canada within the last 14 days? Only the applicant is going to be permitted into the building. So basically the applicant shouldn't have anyone with them. There will of course be some exceptions for accessibility requirements and individuals who need assistance, but generally speaking, only the applicant will be permitted in. Applicants will need to line up outside the building and at kiosks in accordance with floor markings. And in most of the centers, the seating and waiting room will be limited or removed to allow for physical distancing measures at the center. If you have an applicant who's going to be taking a road test, so one of the commercial school bus road tests, they will be also asked to undergo a temperature check prior to doing the road test. They're going to be asked to wear a mask during the entire road test, and again, they will have to supply the mask. They're going to be asked that basic health screening questions a second time. If for any reason the applicant cannot complete the road test, the test will be canceled without penalty. And the drive test examiners will be wearing PPE, full PPE, and installing plastic covers on seats that they are using for the road test. So this is the first phase reopening plan for the drive test centers. We are still actively working with MTO on other measures to further streamline services for school bus applicants. So it's kind of a stay tuned thing. This is a good first step to restrict access to drive test centers primarily to commercial drivers. So we are hoping that that's a good measure and a good first step. We are continuing to work though with MTO on other measures. So we are confident that there will be other measures enacted to help streamline the ability for individuals to get their upgrades completed. The only piece I would add to this is, I went through the licensing renewal or licensing extension components. The focus right now should really be on getting those individuals upgraded that you need to get upgraded versus getting the renewals done. I realize there's a balance between waiting to the last minute to get a renewal done versus running out on the first day, but it's important to understand that because the extensions are in place, the primary need within our industry is to get those upgrades completed. So something you're going to want to consider as you determine how to schedule or assist your applicants in attending a drive test center. Strongly encourage everyone to go to the link here, drivetest.ca home news. It's got full details about the reopening plan, full information. You can have your applicants go to that site to see what they're going to expect at the centers. And if you are looking to book road tests, the information is on the screen here, and they are accepting road test bookings at this time. So that's a review of the licensing extensions and initial plan for the drive test reopening, I should say. What I'm going to do now is walk you through a couple of the licensing components around school bus drivers and some tips and tricks to try and help you navigate some of this stuff. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is getting that criminal background check for your new upgrades for individuals who want their Class B or E license. So a little bit of historical context. As many of you know who've been around in the industry for quite some time, the background checks used to be processed by OPP. Unfortunately, that ended at the beginning of 2017. And the reason that ended is what's known as the Police Record Checks Reform Act. And so that act that came into effect basically made it such that the applicant had to be the person who received the results of their check. So accordingly, OPP got out of delivering background checks for school bus applicants. The original proposal by MTO was to have all applicants mail in their background check documents, but that was something that created a little bit of concern due to processing times around mailing stuff in. So accordingly, there was an electronic background check service developed, which allows the driver applicant an alternative to mailing in their actual documents. So the two documents that are accepted by MTO are what's known as a CRJM check, which is a level 2 criminal background check, or a full vulnerable sector search. Important to know that under the current state of emergency right now, processing for online and mail-in criminal background checks continues. So if you are having drivers mail in their background checks, or you are using the online electronic service, the processing for those products does continue today. You heard me reference criminal record and judicial matters check, or the vulnerable sector search. Just a quick outline of what the difference is between the two. Basically, CRJM is a check of the local police database and the Canadian Police Information Center, so the federal database, the CPIC check. The vulnerable sector search is those two checks plus a check of the pardoned sex offender database. So either of those levels of check are acceptable for the purposes of obtaining your Class B or E license. Important to note that the online background check service that we offer is equivalent to the CRJM. It is not equivalent to the VSS. So it is that lower level check. Obtaining a VSS through the online service is something we have inquired about. There's a lot of challenges with that. We are continuing to request that with our service provider, but it's not something that's imminent at this point. So the only place you can still get your vulnerable sector search is through your local police. So I mentioned earlier you have the two options. You can mail in your background check, or you can use the online service. The online service will be the quicker option. That being said, there are a couple of times we highly recommend that you use the mail-in option. And that is to avoid any delays. So, what tends to happen is an applicant will use the online service, they'll submit the check. The online service check doesn't meet the needs of the ministry, and then they have to go through the process of sending in a mailed-in background check anyway. So we're trying to get you folks avoiding that extra step. So the first piece is if the applicant has any criminal history whatsoever. If that applicant has any criminal history, the online check is going to get rejected by the ministry. You're going to want to have them go ahead and mail in the background checks. Important to keep in mind, impaired driving or a DUI is a criminal offense in Canada. So, a lot of individuals will forget or not realize that DUI is part of a criminal history, and they'll use the online service. So if you do have an applicant that had a DUI, even if it was like 30 years ago, they shouldn't be using the online system. They should go ahead and submit the mail-in option. Other reasons you want to do the mail-in option are obviously if they can't access a computer, or you have an individual who's just really struggles with a computer, and you're not going to be able to walk them through. Or if you have other delays, such as getting medicals processed, then obviously you can use the mail-in option, and that's the address there on the screen. If you're using the mail-in option, the applicant needs to submit the original document. They cannot submit a photocopy. We also highly recommend that you submit a copy of the driver's license when you send that in, as well as send the document by registered mail or courier, so that you have evidence or a record of when that document was received by the ministry. There is no walk-in option, so these background checks cannot be brought to Service Ontario or a drive test center for processing. The only place that they can be processed is by mailing it to the address you see on the screen. Now, there are a couple of police services that are producing a VSS in electronic format. I think Thunder Bay Police is one of them. So if you have an applicant who gets their VSS in electronic format, only those that are generated in electronic format can be emailed to MTO driver control. So don't scan documents, they won't be accepted. It's only those documents that are generated by the police in electronic format that can be emailed to MTO driver control. So a couple of quick tips if you are going to use the online service. Just keep in mind that the individual themselves has to be the one to fill out the application. It's not something that you can do for another applicant. It's that individual who has to initiate and fill out the background check. For those of you who haven't used this before or are interested in using this, the main access point right now is still on the OSBA website. That will be transitioning to the School Bus Ontario website shortly. But if you are interested, it's on the old OSBA website at the moment. There is also an option to have your company set up with an account where you can send out invites to your applicants directly. That is something that if you're interested in, you can just email me and let me know, and I can work on getting the paperwork sent over to you to have that process started. You're going to want to have them access, if you are using the website, you want to access it through the OSBA website or the School Bus Ontario website soon, because you'll get a discounted rate by going that way versus just going through My Back Check. Once the account is set up, if an individual needs to log back into their account, they can do that through the My Back Check website. Typical common problem that comes up is forgetting of passwords. So if you have a driver or an applicant who's forgotten their password, they can go to the My Back Check sites, click Forgot My Password or trouble logging in, and it'll walk them through a password reset process. They can also contact My Back Check to get support to log into that service. This typically comes up after the individual has done their check, and now it's time to go back in and share it with the ministry, and they forget how to do it. So this is typically when that comes up. You do have the option if you have not paid for the check yet. The accounts are email specific. So if the individual wants to just create a new account and initiate another check, they can do that through one of the free online email services. Very, very important that when an applicant's using the online service, that they fill out their driver's license number. For those individuals who are using a company paid account, that field is labeled candidate ID. Please, please, please ensure that they put their driver's license number, or whoever's sending the invite puts the driver's license number in that field. What that allows us to do is it allows us to confirm the individual's identity if the MTO has questions through the driver's license number. If that driver's license number is not entered and the MTO is unable to assign that individual's background check to a licensing record, the background check essentially gets wasted. So we really need folks to make sure they put that license number in there. Common errors that will result in a background check getting rejected. Number one is shortening the names. So the name that you're going to submit in the background service has to match exactly what the name is on the driver's license. So if the individual doesn't have a middle name on the driver's license, don't enter a middle name. If they do, you're going to enter it exactly as it appears on the driver's license. Shortening first names, so Alex versus Alexander, reversing names, you're going to want to input that exactly as it appears on the license. Same thing about making sure that the individual indicates the proper sex and the proper date of birth as well. All those things can result in the background check getting rejected at the ministry level once it gets shared. Once the background check comes back to the individual, only a clear result, like I mentioned earlier, can be submitted to the MTO. So the individual will get something that looks like this. As long as both of those are clear, then the individual can share that result with the MTO. If the individual gets one of these results back, a not clear or a defer to local police, they cannot share that electronic background check with the MTO. They're going to have to go in the mail-in route. So if you have these individuals try and share these results, it tends to delay the process as MTO will take some time to look at it, reject it, let me know, and then I have to turn around and let the applicant know to resubmit. Again, reminder, if you are using the online background check service, that the background checks are not automatically shared. The individual will have to log back into the account and share it with the ministry. And you can confirm that by looking at the background check. You'll see on there a date and confirmation, as you see on the slide, that that background check has been shared with the Ministry of Transportation. Once the background check is shared, it doesn't automatically appear on the record. It's going to take them a few days to process the results. and for the driver's background licensing record to get updated. One of the frustrating parts about this is there's no notification once the background check is processed. So it's a case where the individual, highly recommend you have them call Service Ontario or Driver Control to confirm that their background check is on their license. This is particularly important. This is particularly important right now, in that you want to make sure that that individual has that on the record before they attend a drive test center, because nothing would be worse than they go to the center, they wait in line through all the processes right now, only to find out that their background check is not on their record yet. So you want to make sure that they confirm that that's on their record. Other word of caution, if you call Service Ontario, or if you have the applicant call Service Ontario about their background check and it has not been processed yet, basically Service Ontario is going to say, we don't have any record of the background check, because they cannot see any processing information. So basically don't panic in that case. All it means is it hasn't been processed. So you're just going to want to have that applicant call back, maybe the next day, and then hopefully by that time it'll show up on the record. But if they get told by Service Ontario, we don't have any record of the check being shared, or it's not here, don't worry, it just means it hasn't been processed. If there's excessive delays or concerns, you can feel free to reach out to SBO and we'll see what we can do to help you out with that process. So like I said, processing delays, we are happy to help you out to navigate some of this stuff. Best bet is to try and confirm, if you're using the background check, that the results have been shared and the results were not eligible before you reach out. If you've confirmed that it was clear and the individual shared it with the MTO, the information we need to follow up is the name of the applicant, driver's license number, and the date the background check was shared. If you're using the mail-in option and you're running into processing delays, you're going to want to give us, if possible, the date it was mailed and the tracking number as well. So that's a quick walkthrough of the the background check. I'm just going to walk you through some clarifications around processing of MTO medicals. So just a little bit of context on how medical review works on a normal day, outside of prior to this COVID-19 state of emergency. So there's a lot of documentation that flows through that office. You see the stats on the slide here. They process almost 200,000 medicals a year. And because of that, they have a service standard that's published of 30 days. So basically anyone who submits a medical to medical review, their business standard pre-COVID-19 was a 30-day processing time. Now they often exceeded that, sometimes it's been 15 days, but that was the processing time previously. So I just mentioned that because it's something you want to keep in mind if you're going to have individuals submit medicals to medical review. Medicals are processed on a first come, first served basis as they're received. That being said, during this state of emergency, the office is running at a reduced capacity and they're operating on a priority basis. So the 30-day service standard is not in place right now. Basically, they're trying to process essential services. We are working extensively with the medical review office to ensure that school bus drivers are viewed as essential and that we get that priority processing. But it is something that is a work in progress. So just keep that in mind. That is why also medical renewals are constantly extended as well in those 60-day intervals. So just be aware of that. Something that has come up is, well, why can't we do away with these medical standards for upgrades? Significant challenge. This is something that goes beyond a provincial level. It's at a federal level. It's something that's in place across the country. It forms part of interjurisdictional agreements between Canada, the United States, and other countries that allow individuals to drive with their driver's license in other countries. So simply eliminating medicals is a much more complex process than it sounds. And I just have that there so that you can check the medical standards as well if you're ever interested in knowing what they are. So where do you want to submit your medical during our current state of emergency? This is a bit of a tough call to be upfront. So the first thing everyone should be aware of is if you have a medical where questions 2 through 9 on the front of the medical are answered no. So question 2 through 9 is answered no, and question 1 can be yes or no. That medical can be processed in person at a drive test center. So before COVID-19, we would recommend that individuals take those medicals into a drive test center if possible, because you're not having to wait through the submission period and the processing period of medical review at MTO. You can have that medical processed on the spot at the counter at the drive test center. Obviously on our current state, you're going to have to weigh the delays in medical processing against the delays in drive test, but likely your quickest way to get a medical processed, if it meets this criteria, is at the drive test center. There are drop boxes at drive test centers. They cannot be used for upgrades. They're only available to be used for renewals. And quite frankly, generally speaking, a drop box should really be a last resort form of submission. Because you have the option of sending the medical directly to medical review. So I'm going to touch on that here on the next slide. So again, medicals that meet this criteria can be processed directly at the drive test center and applied to the driver record right there and then. So obviously there's the other group of medicals where questions 2 through 9 are answered yes. These medicals, the opposite is true. They cannot be processed by the drive test center. They have to be processed by MTO medical review. So when you have a medical that meets one of these criteria, we typically recommend the opposite, which is do not submit these medicals through drive test, as it's just going to contribute to a delay. Basically what's going to happen, the driver's going to get up to the counter, they're going to submit the medical, the individual is going to see it doesn't meet the criteria that was on the previous slide, and the medical gets stored to get sent with all the documentation from drive test in a couple days. So you're already introducing a couple business day delay before that document gets mailed to MTO. Your better option is to try and bypass drive test and submit these medicals directly to the medical review office. So under normal circumstances, we would recommend using email. During this state of emergency, MTO is asking that fax be used. Don't know why, but that's the current status. So for non-urgent inquiries. So the fax numbers are on the screen. I realize that everyone doesn't have a fax machine. So some options that are out there are there are fax or email to fax programs that you can get where you can basically send an email to a fax machine and it comes out as a fax. If you are sending fax, very, very important that you retain the confirmation. So you want to make sure you have evidence of that when that fax was sent and that it was received well on the other end in case there's processing issues. Goes without saying, the medical is a two-sided document. Make sure you fax both pages. If you are going to email a medical into medical review, you have to make sure the document is scanned and not photographed. The email system that they use is not designed to capture photographed medicals, so just scanned medicals to submit. So a reminder in terms of what are the intervals for medicals. If you're 46 and under, the medical renewal interval is once every, if you're under 46, it's once every 5 years. 46 to 64, it's once every 3 years, and 65 and older, medical renewals are due annually. And keep in mind that a medical is required when moving up to a higher class, regardless of whether a class foot license is already held. So even if I already hold a class C, if I want to get a class B, I have to submit a new medical or have a valid medical on file within a year to complete that upgrade. So if you run into some late submission issues, so before COVID-19 came about, drivers should have been receiving their medical notification 90 days before it was addressed. Again, pre-COVID-19, a driver would have been downgraded to a Class G license. That should not be happening right now. Again, if the medical was due March 1st or later, and then as long as that individual filed a satisfactory medical within a year, their license would have been automatically upgraded back to their previous class, such as a B or E. Now, there are other considerations with medicals out there that you should be aware of. There are provisions in the Highway Traffic Act to allow medical practitioners or police officers to submit notifications to medical review if they believe the individual has a condition that would make it dangerous to drive. So the form looks like that. You've got information on the slide as to when police will report that individual to medical review. That individual will be required to undergo a further assessment. If that further assessment results in an unsatisfactory medical condition, that individual is going to be physically downgraded out of their classified license, they may actually be suspended as well. This differs from a late submission. So this is a different process altogether. Somebody's physically downgraded because of the medical condition. They will first have to satisfy the medical condition, and then they will have to go through a full upgrade process to get back to their Class B or E. So important to distinguish between somebody who just failed to file their medical on time versus somebody who was actually downgraded. So if you do have processing delays with medicals, again, you can contact us to assist. Name of applicant, license number, the date the medical was submitted, and the method of submission. So how it was submitted to the MTO, and we can try and assist to try and figure out the status of processing as well. I'm just going to quickly touch on the SRLD 006. This is something that tends to apply more for folks, or really only for folks who participate through the DCP program. This has been a long-standing issue where we used to use these forms to capture testing protocol through DCP, and now all of you who participate in DCP realize that you enter the test results online. That being said, this form is still required at the Drive Test Center to capture the information that's on the front of the form. So they're licensing declarations. That information cannot be captured through DCP. Now, that being said, the back of the form no longer needs to be completed by the signing authority. That should be completed through the Drive Test online system, or sorry, the DCP online system. That being said, there's nothing stopping you from filling out the back of this form, but the results should be obtained from the online system. So the way it works is when an applicant attends a Drive Test Center having completed their testing through DCP, they should not be turned away for not having this form with them. So if you send an applicant without the form, they should not be turned away. The Drive Test Center should provide them the form. They'll fill out the front, and then they'll process the testing information based on what was in the DCP system. That being said, again, we were talking about COVID-19. Considerations you may want to look at is if there's ways you can reduce the amount of time interaction that you'll need to undergo at the Drive Test Center. It may be a situation where, if you do have access to the forms and you do want to send them with a driver, great. But again, driver should not be turned away for not having this form. So if the driver doesn't have the form or Drive Test has difficulty retrieving the information, they should be contacting hotline to obtain this information. So yeah, like I said, they shouldn't be turning individuals away. We do know that continues to happen. So common errors that do come up and result in an individual getting turned away by Drive Test or unable to be processed by hotline. So something you want to be aware of when you're entering results into DCP. Make sure you know whether you're entering something as a renewal or an upgrade. In particular, when I talked about that medical downgrade component and an individual having to test to get back to their upgrade, that may be an upgrade versus a renewal. So just be careful of how you're entering those results. Also, we've run into situations where somebody will enter results accidentally for a Class E license versus a Class B. And same thing, the signing authority has to be authorized for the testing of class. Usually where this comes into play is if the individual has an air brake endorsement and the SA who did the testing did not have authority for air brakes, typically on a renewal, for example. That can create issues and will result in the DCP information getting rejected. So just something to be aware of. So again, if you do run into issues with DCP upgrades, here's the information you're going to contact me with, and I will, we will do what we can to try and navigate this for you as much as possible. So a couple more slides here before I get into questions and answers. I do recognize it's 10:45, but we'll be taking a couple of minutes long here. So for quick reference, this is how long documents are valid for the purposes of an upgrade. So medical is good for 1 year, criminal background check is good for 1 year, vision, written, and road tests are good for 1 year, and the SBDIC is good for 5 years. So when that individual attends the Drive Test Center to finalize their upgrade, the Drive Test Center is going to be looking to make sure that they have the first 3 in particular for that initial upgrade to get their temporary Class B or E license, and then obviously the SBDIC when it comes time to get their permanent license. So just keep those in mind. So this webinar itself, we are going to be running a repeat of this webinar on July 9th and August 10th. So, if you found value in this and you had individuals within your organization that you believe, didn't have the chance to attend today or could find this helpful, we are going to repeat this on July 9th and August 10th. The other piece is, as new information becomes available, I will be introducing it into the webinar on those dates. What I'll do my best to do is I'll kind of put the new information right at the beginning of the webinar, do a couple of slides on, hey, here's what's happened since the last webinar before running through the regular webinar. So you can feel free to abandon me as soon as you get through the information you need at the beginning of the webinar. But there are subsequent dates coming up. And we are, these webinars are something we do on a regular basis. If you have topics you'd like us to cover in the future, feel free to let us know. Again, if you have general questions or need assistance, you can feel free to contact us at the email addresses on the screen. We do have a phone number that's on the screen as well. Please keep in mind that phone number is actually a voicemail only phone number. So when you call, you will get a voicemail system. You'll just leave a voicemail and we'll respond to you as soon as possible. So just don't be shocked that you'll get a voicemail, and feel free to leave that there. So with that, that concludes the presentation component of the webinar. I'm going to do my best to get through some questions and answers here. Yeah, get through as many as I can. So first question was medicals that have expired on March 1st or later and the first 60 days have passed. Does that mean the driver will get downgraded, or will they get another 60 days? So at this point, they will get another 60 days. So if I had a medical due on March 1st, I would have been given a 60-day extension to June 1st. And if I didn't get my medical filed by June 1st, I would have gotten a subsequent 60-day extension. Wait, hold on. March 1st is May 1st, and then May 1st would have taken us to July 1st. So they're going to be rolling 60-day extensions. So at this point, drivers should not be downgraded. It would be those rolling 60-day exemptions. Can we resume regular driver training? So in-person driver training if we're following provincial guidelines for reopening. That's something that you would need to determine as an organization. There's nothing from the ministry standpoint that is prohibiting you from doing in-person training. You obviously would just need to make sure you're following the various protocols around distancing, minimum gathering sizes, that type of process. But in and of itself, from a MTO perspective, there's nothing that prohibits you from doing in-person training. You're just going to want to make a decision as an organization to make sure that that is being done in conjunction with the various protocols. So the question came in about Windsor Drive Test Center. So Windsor was not one of the centers that was offering the road tests. So if an individual, as of right now, needs a road test, yes, they would have to go to another center. I believe the closest center would be Chatham at this point. Windsor is still open to process all other systems. They just are not currently going to be offering road tests. So they would be going to Chatham. August 4th is when the secondary date comes out. So as of August 4th, Windsor would resume offering road tests. So renewals for commercial licensing. So I think it's just important to emphasize that when it comes to individuals who have a commercial license that was expired after March 1st, that continues to be extended. So yeah, there's no need to attend. For example, if you have a driver who has their license expired after March 1st, they do not need to attend a drive test center on Monday to have that renewed. That license will continue to be valid for an extended period of time, and at some point the ministry will announce a grandfathering date where, as of this date, we expect everyone to have their licenses renewed. So, not saying that they shouldn't go renew, but it's something that's not an urgent requirement at this time right now. Question came up about when people will be able to write for their B. So you will be able to write at a drive test center on Monday for their B class license. Just keeping in mind those restrictions on alternating months, depending on when when that individual had their birth month. So if they were January to June, they can attend the drive test center on Monday to write for an upgrade. If they were July to December, they're going to have to wait till the following week. But just to be clear, all the drive test centers across the province are open for all of the services you would get inside relating to commercial drivers. So medicals, vision tests, knowledge tests, upgrades, those services are open at all the centers across the province. The only limitation on June 2nd is going to be where you can take an actual road test. That is what's restricted to some of the centers. Question came up, if you create a organization paid account through the online background check service, do you still get the discount? Yes, you do. Basically, the association has negotiated the discount. So regardless of whether you send individuals to the website to access the online background check service or you set up an organization paid account, it is the same price. I believe that is currently $29 plus HST. Question came up about why can't there be a way to receive confirmation when the background check is cleared? Good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer. That's something on the ministry's end that for whatever reason, there's no mechanism to notify the driver once the actual background check gets put on the licensing record. So yeah, I mean, ideally, I realize calling Service Ontario is not perfect, but unfortunately, that's the best we have at this moment in time. Question about the online service in terms of how the background check is shared with the MTO. So once the individual gets the background check, they'll get notification, they log back into their account, and they basically have a system where they can, once they log in, they view their check, and there's an option to share the check with the Ministry of Transportation. If you do need more information on this, I do have more information. You can feel free to contact me and I can outline how that takes place. So a question came up about completing the renewal and knowledge test through the driver certification program, but it doesn't get submitted to drive test until it's closer to the end of the extension period. So as of right now, the testing results would be valid for 1 year. So even if you do the test right now and that individual doesn't attend the drive test center till January of next year, the testing results would still be valid for a year. As we, possibly, I don't know where we're going to end up with these extensions. If we do get to the point where, we might be exceeding a year, it's certainly something we'll engage with on the ministry's end to say, hey, is there a possibility of validating the DCP testing results for more than 1 year? But at this point, it's, sorry, in case you hear me stalling, I'm trying to multitask. I'm terrible at it. Reading questions and trying to answer at the same time is horrible. So yeah, we'll work with the ministry to ensure the testing results are valid for an extended period of time. So a question came up about classroom training conducted via Zoom for DCP participants. For non-DCP participants, when can in-classroom and vehicle training and road testing happen at this point? So again, that's going to be something that you determine for the non-DCP participants as a internal company policy. So for example, if you do want to try doing some of your training via Zoom or via an electronic medium, because you're not part of the DCP program, you do not need to request permission from the MTO. You run your own training program as you see fit. If you want to offer that electronically, you feel free to do so. In terms of resuming in-person testing, again, that's going to be something that you need to evaluate on a company basis, and looking at your local health unit protocols, maximum gathering size, whether or not you can maintain physical distancing. But from an MTO perspective, in terms of the actual laws by MTO standards, there's nothing that says you can't. It is coming down to whether or not you're able to comply with the emergency provisions and keep everyone safe. Like I said, you will be able to resume sending individuals to drive tests, complete written tests as of Monday to all drive test centers, submit medicals, all that good stuff, and you will be able to start having individuals attend drive test centers at the select locations Monday for the road tests, and at all locations August 4th for the road tests. So yeah, a lot of questions coming up about the medicals. So yes, if the medical expired, the individual had an expiry of the medical that was after March 1st, that medical is extended in 60-day windows, and it's a rolling extension. Applicant doesn't need to do anything. They do not have to submit their medical for renewal purposes right now. Individuals will still need to submit a medical for upgrade, but for renewal purposes, you know, that's grandfathered with the March 1st extension right now. They do not need to continue doing that at this point. Just a good reminder from someone that important to put the DL number on the second page of the medical, just to make sure that assist the ministry in ensuring that they have the medical together, the 2 pages, if it does get faxed in. A question came up about the RUO stickers would not be required this summer. That is correct. Same thing, you know, as of right now, you basically look at your school bus even after June, and it's as if it's February 29th. So that school bus is fully licensed and during this extension period. So you can operate your school bus as you would normally, even after the end of June at this point, if the expiry was you know, at the end of June. You can continue to operate that school bus. Secondarily, renewing for license plates for September, you know, you're free to go ahead and start taking that on, but at this point, you would still be allowed to run your school bus in September with plates that expire June 29th. Because the extension is still in place, and we have not heard about anything that would say that this extension is about to end. So that school bus would be allowed to operate in September with plates that expired as of June 28th, as we sit here today. So an individual who has a D-class license and wants to get their B-class license, do they need to have a medical done? Yes, they do. They will need to have a medical done to complete that upgrade. Question about some police departments not doing a VSS at this time. Each police department is different. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information as to when they're going to resume those services. Some are, some aren't. It just depends across the province in terms of, you know, when or where you can get that service. You know, keep in mind, I realize, you know, everyone needs a VSS for both the NTO and for the consortia purposes that you have to keep on file. And this is a redundant check. You are able to get the lower level CRJM check for licensing purposes. So if your department has a mechanism where they allow that CRJM check and you're desperate to use it for licensing purposes, you know, you can explore that avenue as well. SBDIC, is a driver required to recertify after 5 years? No, they are not. The SBDIC is only required at time of upgrade, and that SBDI certificate is valid for 5 years to upgrade. If for some reason after that 5-year window of time the driver gets downgraded and they want to upgrade back up, then at that point, yes, the SBDIC would be required. Question about logging into My Backtrack without using the OSBA link. So if you haven't, if you log in through the OSBA link, you will get the discounted rate for the background check. If you go directly to My Backtrack and log in, you will not. If you set up an organization paid account through the SBO service, you will get the discounted rate as well. But as of right now, if you're having the individuals go online to start the background check, the only place that they can go at this moment in time is through that OSBA website. Like I said, we are in the process of transitioning that over. So if a current driver was waiting for medical review to upgrade a medical review to get their license prior to COVID, what would the time frame look like? You know, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer right now. If there's cases where it's urgent and you need something, you know, looked at desperately, again, let us know. Let us know when that information was submitted, and you know, we can certainly look at it. What are the current options for drivers to submit their VSS? The only option that's available is to mail in if you're going to submit a VSS to the ministry. So there's no in-person submission. You have to mail in or use the online form. Question, medicals with answers no for question 2 to 9. Can they be submitted via email to medical review? So yes, I mean, questions with answers 2 to 9, which I said, your most efficient way right now is likely to go through drive test. You still can submit those to medical review. You are just probably going to be looking at a longer processing time if you do that. So they can be faxed. And keep in mind medical review is asking that fax be used as the main communication method for those medicals right now versus email. Folks, it is 11 o'clock. So I think we're going to conclude the webinar. There are some other questions that I didn't get to, but I will do my best to follow up with you folks with those questions at a later date. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for participating in the webinar. We really appreciate your participation, and we look forward to hearing your survey results about this webinar. And like I said, if you do have feedback in the future, feel free to contact us. So with that, I am going to be ending the webinar shortly, if I can figure out how to do that. Until it's been a while. Here we go. All right, so have a great day, everyone, and we will speak to you soon.